almost noticed simultaneously. There was a pain in the right upper quadrant, which was a continuous pain. So these two things have happened almost together. It almost gives you a clue as to what is happening to this patient. No, the two symptoms,
Yes, yes.
if you combine the two symptoms, the nausea, vomiting, please don't have so many chief complaints. Nausea, vomiting is part of that pain that she has in the right upper quadrant due to the jaundice, stretch on the liver capsule, and the whole thing is related to the liver that is apparently being enlarged. If at all it's the right upper quadrant that the patient has, what else will be a differential, if at all you want to discuss the right upper quadrant with jaundice and abdominal pain?
It may gallstone. It may be a kidney tract related, liver related, and gallbladder related.
That's
so
all. Pancreas will be more towards umbilicus and periumbilicus. If at all you have pain in the right upper quadrant, it is basically arising from the liver, number one, and the jaundice is part of that, and everything is almost acute in onset. It is acute and it's sudden because she's otherwise doing well. All of a sudden she's noticed a pain in the right upper quadrant and she's noticed yellow discoloration of the eyes. Now in that pain, what was this no nocturnal component? What is it that you want to convey?
she's a young female. Initially, the pain was not severe, so it may be
what is the nocturnal? Why do you want to do nocturnal component and not associated with posture variation, abdominal distension?
So nocturnal abdominal can.
Disturbance, background disturbance. So that you want to
please mute your audio. The person who has just joined, please mute your audio and video.
Initially, the pain was not increase in the night, so it may be a peptic ulcer is what we was suspected.
You have to, what I'm trying to tell you is now you have to bring in the history in such a way that you're dealing, you want to describe what is it you want to describe. You want to describe acid peptic disease in this patient? Will this be the presentation?
No.
Dull, dragging pain in the right upper quadrant. What is your differential? It's only one, no? It's only a liver.
Yeah, it may be a visceral pain, liver pain.
Sorry?
It's a visceral pain from liver.
It has to be only viscous that is there is only the liver. No, there's nothing else than that. We have the gallbladder, which is a totally different type of pain. So don't confuse with acid peptic disease. A pain in the right upper quadrant will not be related to food intake. The posture that you ask, actually what we ask about the posture is sometimes when they have large hepatocellular carcinomas, sometimes when they lie onto the right side, they'll find that there's a relief of pain. A large liver, sometimes when they lie onto the left side, they'll find there's a dragging pain towards the left side. That's the only thing that we get related to posture. You're not concerned or you're not discussing something like acute pancreatitis in this patient. Okay. And in that situation, you will not discuss much about associated with food. Which pain in the right upper quadrant, which is dull and dragging, will be associated with food? It will not be associated. Although we talk a lot about gallbladder dyspepsia causing food-related symptoms, seldom do we get that history at all from the patients. Okay, so don't even mention about food-related pain in a patient like this. Now, why did you ask for abdominal distension in this context?
Because it is related to liver. Is it decompensated liver disease or not? Or
that later, no? A little later. They'll all come from history. So if I were to present this very briefly, then I will say that patient was doing well. Always give a date, okay? Give a date when the symptoms started. Yes. It is 1 week. So supposing today is 23rd and you saw the patient say on 15th, you see the patient on 5th of February. Then immediately they're taken to a date and a time. And say 5th of January, all of a sudden she noticed a pain which was sudden in onset, which occurred in the right upper quadrant, continuous pain, dragging pain, which increased over a period of time. And over a period of time, as this pain increased, she also noticed yellow discoloration of the eyes and urine, okay, which has been steadily increasing for the last 2 to 3 days. This is all that you have to mention. You understand? There has been no history of any fever or any other prodromal symptoms, and patient has otherwise not. So now bring in all the important no histories. What else would you like to convey now? You think that leg, you think has come almost together? Is it possible that the patient has got distension of the right upper quadrant, no abdominal distension, but there's a swelling of the leg. Is it possible?
No,
Is it
it's
possible?
less likely.
Less likely. So that edema of the leg, the lower, unless if she's got gross edema, then we're missing something. You cannot connect the two. Either you disconnect the two total history, and then the second chief complaint will be swelling of the lower limb. So two chief complaints are pain, abdomen, right upper quadrant jaundice for 5 days or 7 days, and swelling of the leg for 1 week. So both have come almost simultaneously. So present this and then present about the swelling of the leg. Now try to describe the swelling of the leg.
So swelling of the leg, it was bilateral. It is progressive, and it is not associated with pain or reduced discoloration of skin.
Pain. Then what is when it's bilateral? You would not discuss much about the pain, no? Most of the DVTs unilateral, and discoloration and all will be unilateral. Once it's bilateral, what's the next important negative history that you'll ask? Once there's bilateral,
Urine out. We had to rule out renal and cardiac causes. So urine output.
This will be cardiac because ascites has not come in. There's no abdominal distension. So your first thing to ask is, while she had the sudden onset, it's a sudden onset of pain in the right upper quadrant when swelling of the leg. However, there is no history of orthopnea, breathlessness, palpitation. All that's what you have to describe. And she's also not a known case of cardiac disease. So we just want to be 100% sure we are dealing with the lower limb. So then what are the causes of bilateral swelling of both the lower limbs? That will be your differential. One is cardiac.
One is cardiac. Second is renal causes.
Renal causes will be generalized anasarca.
Yeah, they will anasarca.
Will not get swelling of both the lower limbs. Other causes of bilateral lower limb swelling, just swelling of both the lower limbs, is when there's an IVC obstruction. Any segment. So basically what we're talking is, ultimately it's the effect of whatever is the problem, the effect is on the IVC, causing swelling of both the lower limbs, no? Whether it's cardiac or it is in the IVC, both of them. So it can be in the when you see about the IVC per se, if there is no cardiac symptom, that means it has nothing to do with the CCF, but the patient has got swelling of both the lower limbs bilaterally symmetrically. So then what would be your differentials? So it has to be something that is local, that is causing defective drainage from the lower limbs going to the right heart. Understand?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, I mean, just take in an outpatient clinic, the person says I have swelling in both the lower limbs for last 15 days or 20 days. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? First thing you'll ask for cardiac. And once a cardiac is ruled out and then you say there's nothing wrong with that, then you start saying, why is she having bilateral? So I'll start actually from the infrarenal. Is it, she's 23-year-old, does she have a huge ovarian tumor or something causing compression of the IVC? Or is it something beyond that? That's the way that you would know. If you take what are the causes of bilateral swelling of the legs, these will be your differentials. You understand?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is how you expand. So when you discuss about the swelling of both the lower limbs, you'll have to say this, that she was otherwise until then. But however, for the last 1 week, she's noticed swelling of both the lower limbs. There has been no breathlessness, palpitation, or orthopnea, even though she had the pain in the right upper quadrant. And then say there has been no abdominal distension during this past 1 week. Do you understand?
Okay. Yes, sir.
So even then you cannot explain. Supposing on you have found ascites, then you can bring in that she has noticed some abdominal fullness. But if on examination you found that there's no ascites, you don't bring that history at all. All right. It's very difficult.
Okay.
Patient who's got a pain in the right upper quadrant and also has swelling of both the limbs, lower limbs, without having a abdominal distension. Is it possible?
Distension.
Is it possible?
No, no, not in liver disease.
Yeah, you'll not be able to link the two. So therefore, let us see what happens on examination. If on examination there is a finding of ascites, then I will bring in the history that she also noticed mild abdominal distension. I'll push in the history so that then it's easy for you to connect the two. Okay?
Okay.
Now move on.
Yeah. So
now,
there is no.
Don't keep saying no histories of so many, no? So during this entire period of the short history of one, what are the things that you would like to ask? What are the important no history? During this time of 1 week, there is no, now tell. Just put comma.
Just fever, chest pain, palpitation, breathing difficulty, there is no decrease in urine output, weight loss, abdominal distension, hematemesis, melena, or altered sleep pattern or disorientation.
So 1 minute. So if you take it in the context of the patient who's got sudden pain in the right upper quadrant and swelling about the lower limb, what's the first thing that within 1 week? Are you dealing with an acute liver failure? No. The first thing that crosses is there is pain and the swelling of the lower limb. Are you dealing something with a sudden acute liver failure like presentation? So bring in the signs of liver cell failure first, not fever. Understand? So context is a sudden pain right upper quadrant with jaundice and the swelling of the lower limb. So immediately you think, are you dealing with some sort of a liver failure? Is it ACLF or is it acute liver failure? These are the things that should cross your mind. I will not ask for history of cough. You understand? So then you say that during this period of 1 week that she has the sudden onset of symptoms, keep on adding one to the other. When she's noticed pain in the right upper quadrant and swelling about the lower limbs, there has been no history of any GI bleed, any bleeding tendency more than GI bleed, no abdominal distension, and sleep pattern has been fairly normal. She is otherwise able to carry on with the day-to-day work with a good performance. So we know that nothing much has happened, despite the fact that she's got pain in the right upper quadrant. And then you say, antedating this present complaints, there is no prodromal symptom, no history of CAM intake. It is just the way you present it, no history of CAM intake. Now you want to just merge the history. You understand? So there's no history of CAM intake. There's no history of prodromal symptoms. And of course, alcohol history will not come, but just see that you've noted down in the case sheet that alcohol history is also not there, because it's not uncommon. People from Northeast and all, they do consume alcohol. And the whole thing presentation may just be a presentation of an alcohol-related liver disease. All right? Okay. So then continue. What is this lumbar? Let's go back. What is this lumbar pain? No history of decreased urine output or lumbar pain. What's that?
Ma'am, that is because of differential of IVC obstruction. I thought it's because of kidney enlargement.
Why should we get lumbar pain and IVC obstruction?
Congestion of kidneys can cause visceral lumbar pain.
Oh no, never. Which type of renal pathology you will get in IVC obstruction? Usually it's a hypernephroma renal vein thrombosis, which is usually, it'll never be bilateral. And therefore the pain is not a feature at all. Very rarely. They all will present first with that and then they'll have other features of IVC obstruction, which means that you're biased towards an IVC obstruction. You understand? So in a patient who's got predominant symptoms of edema leg and pain in the right upper quadrant, what are the important is only the differential. What are your differentials? And only then you'll know what is important, no histories. What are the important differentials in this patient who's got a pain in the right upper quadrant, intense pain, severe pain, onset with jaundice, and there's no ascites. What are your differentials just for this history? What are your differentials?
Acute hepatitis, maybe due to
hepatitis, and therefore, once you'll ask for prodromal symptoms. Number one, good. Next will be
choledocholitis and cholecystitis.
Okay, choledocholitis, but the pain will not be this presentation. Number two, what will be the other condition when you can? So any congestion.
Cholecystitis.
Any congestion of the liver will cause a stretch. When all can you get a congested liver? When you get a congested liver, there's a biliary obstruction. Okay.
Venous.
If there's a lymphatic obstruction, or if there's an outflow tract obstruction, all these. So this is the acute pain in the right side could be a congested liver due to outflow obstruction. What are the outflows to the liver? What are the outflows to the liver?
A hepatic vein is a venous outflow.
And
lymphatics.
And the lymphatic.
Yeah.
And biliary.
Biliary.
So there are three inflows to the liver. What are the inflows to the liver?
Portal vein, hepatic artery.
So whenever there's a congestion, either to the outflow, either hepatic vein or the biliary or to the lymphatic, you can get a large congested liver, and that can cause it. Okay, this is one. The second common cause would be a hepatocytic damage, hepatitis. Where you have acute hepatitis, alcohol-related hepatitis, or in a patient, hepatocellular, or it can be a congested liver. These are the two important conditions when you can get a sudden onset of pain with a stretch on the liver, causing severe pain in the right upper quadrant. So your differentials gets almost shortlisted to these two predominant pathology. Okay, one is hepatitis-like presentation, when there is a ballooning of hepatocytes, and therefore you get stretch on the Gleason's capsule, which is a uniform disease, as would occur in acute hepatitis, alcohol-related hepatitis, and all these you get a sudden stretch. The second important cause would be a congested liver, which can be outflow tract due to hepatic vein, venule, sinusoidal obstruction syndrome, or it could be obstruction to the lymphatic, again, which is part of outflow tract, or biliary. In biliary obstructions, the pain is not so intense. It's more of a discomfort. Why is it so? Because it's a passive distension. When you have a biliary obstruction, suppose you have a patient with periampullary carcinoma, you never get an acute pain, no? It's a slow, passive condition. So therefore, now if you shortlist, in these two conditions, you'll find that outflow tract obstruction, sinusoidal obstruction, liver, in all these conditions, you'll get a tense, large distended liver. Outflow tract obstruction to biliary obstruction is more of a discomfort. So when you have a discomfort in the right upper quadrant, you start thinking with jaundice, you start thinking of a biliary problem. If you have a sudden onset, then the causes would be hepatitis-like picture, where there's ballooning of hepatocytes due to hepatocellular jaundice, due to CAM, could be due to drugs, could be due to viral hepatitis, or due to alcohol, common causes. And the outflow tract would be right from veno-occlusive disease to small hepatic veins to large hepatic veins. They could get a sudden distension. You understood?
Yes.
So that history will tell you, sudden onset, sudden stretch, shortlist to hepatocellular and congested liver. All right? Yeah.
Okay.
So one where you can get hepatocellular damage causing acute. Alcohol, drugs, and viral hepatitis are all three conditions where you can get a sudden onset of pain. And you can get toxic, say yellow phosphorus poison, all these, wherever you have a sudden hepatic damage, sudden ballooning, sudden necrosis, all these can cause sudden pain. So it can be hepatocellular, which will result in liver cell failure, okay? Or an outflow tract obstruction. I told you outflow are three. One is hepatic venous outflow tract, biliary outflow, and lymphatics. The biliary outflow tract will also be discomfort, because it's a passive distension and dilatation of the biliary system. Whereas if it is an acute tract, it can be sudden, it may be insidious, and may be chronic. Understand? If it is a slow obstruction, it will be, but if it's a slow obstruction, it will present as a congested liver with an acute pain. All right?
Yes, sir.
In congestive cardiac failure, it is a chronic obstruction. So again, you'll have a discomfort. Only when it is acute, you'll get a sudden onset of pain. All right? Okay.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
The chat box, I can't see from my mobile. Okay, just continue.
Ma'am, can you consider large liver abscess in this situation, which can produce pain and sometimes IVC obstruction?
Fever is not there, and that pain of that liver abscess, usually we'll find jaundice. It will be more insidious. It will not come within 5 days, no. It will be more insidious. The patient will have a local tenderness that they catch on deep inspiration. There will be little fever. There will be shivering. There will be chills. So that history of jaundice with fever, then my differentials will go for infections. But in absence of fever, maybe I may not consider the possibility. But still, the acute stretch, as you rightly said, can be due to a liver abscess. Absolutely.
One more question is there: whether multiple liver metastases can cause such symptoms?
Not in acute. If it is acute, then it has to be a rupture, then it will present more like a shock. Otherwise, you won't get metastatic. Will all be discomfort. They'll never present with an acute presentation of this 5 days history of acute pain presenting with jaundice. Generally not. A sudden rupture, supposing a patient has got a hepatocellular carcinoma and there's a sudden rupture or bleed into that, yes, it can present as acute pain. But then the history will be there a little longer. History will be there, a little loss of appetite, loss of weight. First presentation as an acute presentation will be more of a hemorrhage into one of these. So that will be more like a state of shock. Okay, you're going to the past history, but what are the other components of the present history? In the present history, what are the other things you'll have to tell? You'll have to tell what is her intake, what is a nutritional, that is she able to eat well, how is the bowel movement, how is all those things have to be covered up in the present history.
Okay, I covered it later, ma'am, in the diet history.
Okay, go to the past then. Yeah, okay.
In past history, She was suffered with severe abdominal pain of 3 weeks duration, which was associated with 2 weeks of duration of abdominal distension and breathing difficulty of 1 week. She was admitted for this complaint, and there was no history of jaundice, pedal swelling, or decreased urine output at that time. She was extensively evaluated using during that admission, and with blood investigation, abdominal imaging, and fluid was removed from the abdomen. Her symptoms recovered during that admission, and that's why she was discharged with oral medications and advised to follow up twice monthly for regular blood checkup. But after improved symptoms for next 1 month, she again developed progressive abdominal distension and breathing difficulty, despite on regular follow-up and on treatment, and landed up in a hospital after admission. Her abdominal fluid was removed again, and some therapeutic procedure involving stenting was done. Her symptoms recovered very rapidly.
Look, 1 second. See, the thing is, this January and February is almost the same problem, no?
Yeah.
You have to merge the whole thing. You have to say, antedating this present complaints that the patient has come with in the year 2018, in the months of January, February, this is how you discuss. There's no point in repeating the January history again in February, and the February is just, it's monotonous. The history is monotonous. So just say in the month of January, February, she had a sudden onset of abdominal pain similar to what I just described. However, this was associated with abdominal distension, which was increasing in girth over a short period of time, requiring repeated paracentesis, for which she was evaluated. And after imaging, apparently to what the patient says, a stent has been deployed, after which she had relief of symptoms. That is all that you have to describe. Don't keep describing in January she went there, then she came out and nothing was done. She was given it. The January history is meaningless. No, it is giving no extra information. So the January, February, whether she went to a tertiary center, that's all not our problem. Okay, antedating this present complaint, there is a relevant history which is linked to the present complaints. It's not the past history. There is one antedating history in the year 2018, January, February, in the 2 months when she had a similar complaint of a sudden onset of pain with abdominal distension, which required repeated paracentesis. And at that, however, during that point of time, there was no history of any jaundice according to the patient, and urine output was fairly this thing. She had extensive evaluation, and based on the evaluation, a stent was deployed, details of which are not known to her. That's all that you have to say. You understand?
Okay.
Okay. And then what else would you say? Okay. What else will you say for that history? So that means you've asked her some questions for that symptom. What all would you ask for that symptom? The symptom that she's come in January, February. What else would you ask? What else would you ask?
Is there any disorientation or?
No, you've got a history of stent deployment, no? So in a patient with no jaundice, but with ascites, which has got resolved with placement of the stent, what are the possibilities?
It may be a biliary pathology, biliary pathology, pancreatic pathology, or vascular pathology.
Where do you think the stent could have been deployed? It's not the biliary system, apparently. No?
Vascular, yeah. Vascular system.
If it is vascular, where do you think the stent could have been deployed? What are the possibilities? One, it could be she's had repeated paracentesis. So one possibility is it could be a
hepatic veins.
It could be a tips also, no? We do not know.
Tips, tips.
What we only she's had a repeated paracentesis. Urine output has fairly been good, which is what is described in any patient with outflow tract obstruction. And the patient is after repeated tapping. This interval is important. Supposing she requires a tap every 5 to 7 days. That means a rapid reactivation. In that situation, whether she responded to diuretics or she was diuretic non-responsive, or she had an acute pain, imaging was done and a stent was deployed. So there are possibilities are A, it could be a TIPS deployment, number one, or it could be one of the outflow tract obstruction requiring a stent deployment. And if it was deployed for an outflow tract obstruction, where do you think the stent would have been in? What you just mentioned it. Could be the hepatic vein.
One of the hepatic vein.
It has to be one of the hepatic veins, because that's the only way that you know that the ascites would come down. You understood?
Yes.
So the history that you got in February of 2018, February 2018, what else would you have asked What could have precipitated that problem? What are the things that you would ask? At that time, she was 21 years old, no? She's 21 years old.
Yeah, on oral, if she's on any oral contraceptive pills, but she's unmarried, man. That's
so if she had irregular menstrual cycle, many of these patients are on oral contraceptive pills. They're on regular, every once in 3 weeks, they'll keep taking the pills again and again. And that history, OCP history is very important. Any other history?
yes.
Any other thing that can precipitate that particular problem? Outflow tract.
Pregnancy and infection.
So she's not married, no? Not married. So therefore,
infection.
So infections also will not come in. So if at all it is some hypercoagulable state, we do not know what it is. So you may get some other history that could have precipitated this. Autoimmune condition will not come as a differential diagnosis in this patient. So, okay, we'll just take up that history a little later, the Jan 2018. So just continue that during about 2 months.
Ma'am, will some CAM intake or Ayush medicines produce a situation like this, like outflow obstruction? Will that history to be included?
Yeah, they'll present as veno-occlusive or sinusoidal obstruction syndrome, where they'll have immediate tense cystitis. So toxic hepatitis will come as an important differential diagnosis. But I think she had no jaundice, no, at that time? It's only
no jaundice at that time.
There's no, except for the tense ascites, there's no jaundice also at that point of time. But drugs is important. But oral contraceptives will be one, and number 2 would be drugs that can present, occlusive like presentation or sinusoidal obstruction syndrome. Okay, which is that is important. Okay, then.
Then her symptoms recovered. Her symptoms recovered very rapidly. She was discharged. During about 2 months of period, she recalled that she had low hemoglobin and platelets, which recovered to normal after 1 year of regular medication and follow-up.
What is that information giving you? What convey by that information? Hemoglobin was low and platelets were low, and she recovered.
The platelets were low. The one finding can be directed as CLD, but it recovered to normal. It may be a autoimmune process, autoimmune hemolysis. Autoimmune.
You'll ask in a patient who's got a stent deployment. I think the first thing and foremost you'll ask is whether she was put on any anticoagulants. No, that's most important.
Yeah.
Most important.
Oral medications.
Exactly, and whether she was asked to monitor her blood periodically for the iron. She's educated. So the only question that is, I will really not bother whether the platelet count was low, hemoglobin, it is irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. The other thing that you can ask is, she's an educated person, was any further workup done and was any other diagnosis that was offered to her? That is important. She's educated. So to that extent, they have been told you have to be on anticoagulants lifelong, some information you may have got, or she may have been told that you take the medicine for a short period of time and come for reassessment. That is important. So that is the only thing that is important. Please do not mention about this, whether the hemoglobin was low. You lose your time on your presentation. It's irrelevant in this particular case, no? It's not helping us in any way. It's not helping us in any way. Now, how was she from 2018 to 2021? How was she? That's most important.
Yeah, after she was on regular medication, she was prescribed blood thinners and once a month or twice monthly visit.
What medication?
Blood thinners means she was regular on follow-up.
No, she knows the names of the drugs?
Yeah, means she was educated. She knows the names, but I didn't mention it because I thought the names should have mentioned in the past.
Your problem, doctor, your person comes to a tertiary referral center only for management, not for diagnosis. Patient is not coming to you for diagnosis that I'm on a blood thinner and I've got a stent deployment. Now she's come to you for a recurrence of symptoms after the stent that is being deployed, and then she's on blood thinners or anticoagulants. So that is most important, no?
Yeah.
He's not coming to you for a diagnosis of the outflow tract obstruction. She's coming to you for management of the current problem.
Yeah.
So
she was on tablet warfarin.
This is what you have to narrate and tell. What is, so you have to, even though you put it in the past, I'll not put it as past history. I'll say whatever you described as a present and then say, antedating this present complaint, there is an important relevant history to this particular presentation. And that in the year of January, February of 2018, patient had a sudden onset of abdominal distension with a pain in the right upper quadrant, which was intense and it was tense, for which she required repeated paracentesis. She had blood evaluation, imaging procedures, and a stent was deployed, after which she had a significant relief of symptoms. Patient had no further reaccumulation. She was put on oral anticoagulants, details of which, if she tells the names, you mention the names, and she was asked to monitor the INR periodically. Just remember, when if you're a DM student, if you're a DND student, and if you go to Vellore or any of these tertiary referral centers, patients will say that I am having this particular disease. I am a case of ulcerative colitis, doctor. I've come for a relapse. That's the history you'll get. At that point, it's only management. So you start by saying patient is known in case of inflammatory bowel disease. You understand?
Yes.
She's not come to you for diagnosis of this. So therefore, just be careful about that. Okay, so this will actually come as part of it. Instead of putting past, I say relevant in this particular patient. Okay, move on. Move on.
Okay. So as she followed in the rheumatologist OPD, I asked for any joint pain in the past, oral or genital ulcer, or skin rash or ulcers. So she denied the history of that. There is no history of diabetes, hypertension, or TB in the past, and bronchial also. In the drug,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide.
In the drug history, there is no history of CAM injection, already I mentioned, and she had a good compliance of the medication, that is anticoagulants in the past. And in the menstrual history, she had irregular menses since last 3 years. Following with, she's following for that in the gynecology OPD regularly. Her last menstrual period is 8 of December, and is 14 days back of representation. And she had a heavy flow during this menses, and with the blood clots continued for more than 5 days. She was started on daily 1 tablet of oral hormonal therapy and told to continue for 1 month for heavy menses, and then stop and follow up in the gynecologist OPD.
This is the most important relevant history, no?
Yeah.
Most relevant. So if you put the whole context, the whole history into perspective, okay?
Yes.
And just a comment on the personal history, never say denies, you know? It looks as though you want her to have the addiction. It's not like that. Just say there's no history. Don't bring in the denial and all that, okay? It's a very strong word. It looks as though you want her to have that behavior. So it's not like that. Just there's no history, simple. Now, if you put the whole context into perspective, as someone rightly said, I would say patient was doing well until January, February of 2018. And chief complaints are, you can bring in the present. As you bring in the present history, you say that antedating this present history, you can even start, you can say the present complaints and say that the history back January, February 2018, and the patient until then was totally asymptomatic, totally normal when she had this present symptoms. Make it very brief. Only 5 sentences you have to mention. Where in January, February 2018, she had this sudden onset of symptoms for which a stent was deployed. Patient has been on anticoagulant and has been doing well. And then this is all that you have to mention about that particular history. And now has come with the presentation of a sudden onset of abdominal pain, which is severe in intensity in the right upper quadrant with onset of jaundice and history of swelling of the leg. Now, this is what you have to expand. You understand?
Yes.
If I were there, this is what I would do. Otherwise, we'll be breaking ahead, you know, waiting for this history, whereas this history is actually relevant to the present history. Okay? Now, just move on. Just move on. Now, so now just leave this. Now, give a good summary. Just give a good summary of this case. Summarize.
So the 23-year-old female presented with right upper quadrant abdominal pain since 7 days, increasing period swelling since 5 days, immediate postprandial nausea and vomiting, and jaundice since last 2 days. She had an episode of similar abdominal pain 3 years back, except that it was associated with abdominal distension and breathing difficulty, and that illness.
You're able to hear me. You don't repeat the whole history what you said.
Devak, just summarize what Madam has told.
Yeah, just summarize.
Okay.
Don't look at this slide. Don't look at the slide.
This slide.
Okay. So the 23-year-old female was completely all right 3 years back, presented with abdominal distension and abdominal pain, and she was treated with some type of stenting, and the duration of
Okay, I'll just do it for you. Suppose you present this. Summarizing 23-year-old lady who's come to this time for admission for symptoms of abdominal pain, was asymptomatic until January or February of 2018, when she presented for the first time with a sudden onset of pain in the right upper quadrant associated with sudden onset of abdominal distension over a period of 2 months, requiring several episodes or several times she required repeated large volume paracentesis, had a detailed evaluation during the procedural evaluation, she also had a stent deployed, details of which are not known, but was told to continue anticoagulants, mention the names if she said, which she has not defaulted and has continued until of the present time. In the month of December 2020, because of the irregular menstrual cycle and menorrhagia, she was asked to take some hormone replacement therapy, and almost 2-3 weeks after the intake, she noticed a similar episode of pain, but this time this was associated with jaundice, and there's history of edema, swelling of both the lower limbs. However, there's no history of any abdominal distension. During this entire period, from February, there's been no history of any other features of liver cell failure in the form of altered sensorium, GI bleed, or except for the right upper quadrant pain, no other pain. This is how you have to summarize. And overall, the performance scale is WCOG 2 or 1, or if it's 0. You understand?
Yeah.
That is all that you mentioned. Are you understanding? Then everyone,
Yes, ma'am.
anyone,
Yes, ma'am.
this is what the presentation is. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so you want to discuss the stent, or you want to say what's your syndromic diagnosis? Let's move on. What's your syndromic diagnosis?
So it may be a recurrent acute hepatic outflow tract obstruction.
Never say maybe and all. No. What's your syndromic diagnosis? What is your syndromic diagnosis? Syndromic diagnosis.
It's acute hepatic outflow tract obstruction with no features of any portal hypertension, in no ascites, and there is no renal failure associated with it, and probably
No.
it will.
This is no. What's your syndromic? She's got a chronic liver disease. She's got a chronic liver disease. Chronic liver disease. Okay. She has got a chronic liver disease. Ascites has come earlier, so there is some evidence to say she's got portal hypertension. Okay. And the nature of the chronic liver disease with portal hypertension is most probably an outflow tract obstruction. And the outflow tract obstruction could be anything. It can be veno-occlusive disease. It could be small hepatic vein. It could be large hepatic vein. It could be just a TIPS that has happened in this patient, or it could be a stent in the hepatic vein. So your final diagnosis will be chronic liver disease, portal hypertension, outflow tract obstruction. I would like to discuss the site of obstruction right now with jaundice, hepatocellular jaundice currently, and with swelling of both the lower limbs, suggesting probably there's a obstruction through the extension of obstruction to the inferior vena cava. Okay.
Yes.
And
Yes,
with a precipitating factor of a possible of a hormone replacement therapy, no comorbidity, and with a performance scale of 0. This is how you tell the final syndromic diagnosis. Now, if you have to discuss the case beyond this about the stent deployment, the possibilities are, and patient is probably a hypercoagulable state, and that you have to mention on anticoagulants, long-term anticoagulant, either worked up or not worked up, thrombophilic state. So it's a thrombophilic state. If it's worked up, then you mention what is the diagnosis. If it's not worked up, uninvestigated. Mention it as uninvestigated. You understood?
Yes.
That will be your syndrome. Now, what do you think has happened to this patient in the natural history? What do you think has happened? If the patient had TIPS, just take for consideration. If the patient had TIPS, what would have been the presentation?
The portal hypertension is subsided for some time, and there is an underlying CLD. So in between the symptom-free period is due to the decreased portal pressures.
One possibility could have been a TIPS that has been deployed. There's been no liver cell failure. Today, TIPS is being used even for sinusoidal obstruction syndrome. In small hepatic venules, DIPS is another procedure where you do a direct intrahepatic portosystemic shunt for even IVC obstruction. So we do not know what the stent is, whether it's a DIPS or a TIPS, we do not know. Or it is an isolated stent for the hepatic vein occlusion alone, major hepatic vein. No, these are the possibilities.
Yes.
So if the patient had TIPS or a DIPS, what could have happened now? I do not know what has happened because I've not seen all the case details beyond this. So suppose it was tips or dips,
Maybe
what could have happened now?
blockage of the stent block, or
The stent block, she would have developed ascites, no? So ascites is not coming. So
yeah.
exactly. So therefore, it's unlikely that the patient has got an occlusion. What the patient has got is edema of the lower limbs. So what she could have had is a stent in the hepatic vein, which could have got blocked, or there's an extension of the thrombus into the IVC. This is the only way you can explain. No, the only way you can explain the two sequence of events. Jaundice has come on all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So jaundice has come on all of a sudden. Maybe the other two hepatic veins are opening up. Therefore, ascites is not coming in. But the jaundice could be part of the hepatocellular jaundice due to obstruction of the stent. And if there's a thrombus in the IVC, then you can explain the swelling of the lower limb. And the site of, where do you think would be the site of IVC obstruction, if at all she has IVC obstruction? She has. So where do you think is the site? It's only in the lower limb.
Okay. Suprahepatic.
Suprahepatic present with what? With ascites, no? There will be congestion of the liver. You will have sudden obstruction of the suprahepatic will cause a congested liver, and you'll get ascites. So ascites is not coming, but sometimes ascites may not come if the collaterals are huge. If there are huge collaterals which is decompressing the IVC, then the patient may not get ascites. So one possibility, it could be suprahepatic IVC obstruction. Yes. Then can it be infrarenal? It could be just a state. It's a hypercoagulable state. Maybe she's got an inferior vena cava obstruction, nothing to do with IVC, and maybe the hepatic vein stent is getting blocked. So these are the things that you have to consider the possibility. All right.
Okay.
Any other thoughts, Dr. Varghese? Any other thing that you'd like to discuss? Other senior people?
I think what you have discussed until now is what I also think. There are some questions from students. In such a patient where the patient present acutely now with abdominal pain and with a past history in 2018 and 19, should we present the entire thing from 2018 and say like that, or should we present it as in the past? Because this is always a confusion for students.
Yeah, this is what I said, no? This is how I would discuss. I would start with the present, but I will not put that as past history. And you must mention that during this history that I've just presented, I would add on and say there is an important relevant history which is important for the present complaints. And then add on that to the present history. Don't make it, it's not a past history.
I think her menorrhagia also should have come, and the hormonal therapy also should have come in the part of the current history. Then things would have been straightforward.
Exactly. Yeah. Because then it's easy to present it, no? It's easy to present. Any other important questions are there?
Any reason why there is no ascites this time? Because she presented with ascites initially and had almost refractory ascites, but now with the present symptom there is no ascites. Any explanation for that?
The only way that we can explain is the hepatic vein is still patent, or the collaterals are so huge. Supposing the right hepatic vein is patent, there are comma-shaped collaterals which is decompressing, then the chances of ascites can still be less. It can be,
okay. We can say that it was predominantly IVC obstruction and probably partially hepatic veins are blocked. But then why jaundice? How to explain jaundice?
Jaundice is part of the extension of thrombus downward towards the hepatic veins. That's the only way you can explain. Sudden occlusion. So what we generally say is whenever there's a obstruction to the IVC, a stasis thrombus occurs, when it comes down into the hepatic vein, you can get sudden onset of blockage and you can get sudden onset of ascites. Number one, jaundice. Other one is oral contraceptive pills presenting hepatic venular occlusion like presentation. We know occlusive disease like presentation. Then again, you can get jaundice. No, it may not be due to the occlusion. If there was occlusion, ascites should have come in. So there could be a component of hepatocellular cholestatic jaundice. I would definitely consider that possibility with a past history. And maybe the whole thing that you're describing is actually just a drug-induced liver injury due to oral contraceptive pills presenting as outflow tract obstruction or veno-occlusive disease, hepatic venular damage causing this particular obstruction. And other important thing that you have to mention, doctor, is whether it is acute or chronic BCS, outflow tract. What do you think it is? It is a chronic Budd-Chiari, no? If at all.
It's a chronic Budd-Chiari.
The chronic obstruction, which has been managed with intervention, where she's had a stent deployment. So your final diagnosis, syndromic diagnosis, actually would be a outflow tract obstruction, chronic obstruction, probably of the hepatic vein, stent deployed, with possibility of an extension of an IVC obstruction, 1. Number 2, oral contraceptive pill related veno-occlusive or cholestatic jaundice must come in your differential diagnosis. Because supposing you have alpha gamma DT elevated, then OCP is one of the possibilities. So just keep the OCP pills as a red herring, maybe just deviating you from your regular presentation, and keep a possibility of cholestatic jaundice due to OCP or veno-occlusive like presentation, and the swelling of the leg may be just part of a liver cell failure. We do not know. Okay.
Should we mention cholestatic jaundice in the absence of cholestatic symptoms? Can we explain everything due to sort of a veno-occlusive disease?
That's what I said. It will be more veno-occlusive rather than cholestatic. Yeah. Hepatocellular. Yeah. But I would definitely consider OCP as one of the causes of a drug-induced liver injury in this patient. Okay. Okay. So how would you on examination?
On examination, she was conscious oriented, pulse rate is 100 per minute, regular with good volume, normal character, all peripheral pulses are fed and bilateral equal. BP was normal, respiratory is 16 per minute, BMI is 29, and JBP was not raised. Icterus was present, pallor was present, with hepatojugular reflex is absent. Thyroids are normal. There is no external stigmata of liver cell failure or chronic liver disease. Nails platynychia was present. There is no hepatic flaps noted. Bilateral non-pitting pedal edema was noted. There is no varicosity or hyperpigmentation of skin or starches ulcer of legs seen.
Fine. Okay. Edema, yeah, I always mention about the dry BMI. Okay, continue. Continue.
In per abdominal examination, on inspection, there is no dilated or tortuous veins on the back or in the front of the abdomen. And palpation, there is a tender, smooth hepatomegaly. Liver palpable is 6 cm below the costal margin and in mid-clitoral line.
Doctor, just say, mention on inspection, no visible veins. That's it.
Okay.
Just no visible veins. That's all. On palpation.
Yeah. On palpation, tender smooth hepatomegaly with liver palpable 6 cm below the costal margin in mid-clitoral line. Liver span was 16 cm in mid-clitoral line, and left lobe of liver is not palpable. Spleen is not palpable.
Just one comment here. Do not mention about the lobes of the liver when you're palpating the liver. Okay. Never mention the lobes of the liver. Maybe there's agenesis of the left lobe. You never know what is happening to these patients. Be very simple and plain and just say the liver is palpable so many centimeters in the mid-clavicular line and so many centimeters in the mid-sternum. Sometimes in patients with atrophy-hypertrophy complex, you cannot comment on the lobe of the liver. So be as simple as is possible so that you are not taken for a surprise. Most of the times in cirrhotic liver, the right lobe shrinks and becomes atrophic. No, so but if you just mention that liver is palpable in mid-sternal line and mid-clavicular line, that is sufficient to mention the liver enlargement. So do not comment on lobes of the liver. Never comment on the lobes of the liver. That's how I would say. Okay, spleen is not palpable. Trop space is resonant.
Yeah, dullness is actually trop space is noted, and there is no shifting dullness present. In auscultation, there is normal balls.
What are you looking for in auscultation? More of a venous hum. You're not looking for a bruise in this patient, no? You're looking more for a hum.
Venous hum. Yeah.
Okay, so other systems are normal?
Yeah, other system, cardiovascular system, only hemic murmur was noted in aortic area. And there is, and respiratory system also, there is no evidence of pleural effusion because of trop space is dull. And in CNS also, there is no focal neural effusion.
So at the end of examination, your diagnosis almost remains the same. So after examination, what extra information have you got? You've got a liver that is large and there is jaundice. That's it. There's no ascites and there are some findings in the lower limb. It is not given any added information. So your 80% of the diagnosis that you made on history should be right. Because on only thing that has happened is you're not getting any veins over the abdominal wall. So you have to explain the lower limb swelling. So what are the possibilities now? The only thing you're not able to explain. So only thing is if there are huge collaterals within that you're not able to pick up the veins over the anterior abdominal wall. HDR negative, you said, no? That means hepatojugular reflux is negative. What does it indicate? It's absent.
It indicates if the hepatic outflow tract is obstructed, the pulse will not be palpated in the JVP. Pulse JVP is not rise
not
during the abdominal,
compression.
abdominal compression.
Yeah, but other thing is, it again depends on the collaterals that are there. Now, it also depends on whether it's the right hepatic vein that is patent. We do not have any idea on what it is, okay? But it does give you some information. With that occlusion, normally you would have expected some ascites, which is missing. No, the only thing that is missing now is they're not getting the ascites in the abdomen, but trough space is dull, you said. So maybe there is some amount of splenomegaly, but which is not palpable.
Yes.
Which is a known feature in outflow tract obstruction. No, which is a known fact.
Yeah.
Outflow tract obstruction. So do you think still we're dealing, I'm just wondering whether we're still missing something in the liver and the stent is actually a TIPS that has been placed, and the jaundice that the patient has got is more related to oral contraceptive pills, and the edema leg is the only thing that we're not able to explain. Whether there's a hypercoagulable state is still something that we have to consider. Would you still like to consider the diagnosis of Budd-Chiari syndrome? You have to keep two broad differentials because you're not getting, examiners will keep harping on this. Large liver, tender liver, jaundice, and the patient has got no ascites. So there's nothing to say that right now the stent is patent most probably because there is no ascites. So the possibility is that the patient still has a shunt which is patent, or there are huge collaterals that is taking over and ascites is not there. This is one possibility. The other possibility differential will be an outflow tract obstruction. So these are the two things that you have to consider. Dr. VT?
Is it very acute presentation for the abdomen to form ascites in this case?
Yeah, ascites with such a large tender liver, you expect ascites to be present. In its absence, then you have to consider the possibility of two independent pathology. That patient has got oral contraceptive related problem where the patient has got jaundice related to the OCP pills presenting as hepatocellular or mixed cholestatic with hepatocellular jaundice, and the hepatic veins actually if the patient had occlusion of the stent, then ascites should have come in. If the patient has IVC obstruction, you can explain lower limb swelling. And the only other way to explain this, if there's a thrombus extending in the hepatic vein, again, ascites should have come in. So ascites, absence of ascites is something that tells me that we're dealing with an entity where she had an obstruction, she has a stent deployed, but the present jaundice, I will still consider whether we're dealing with just an OCP-related drug-induced liver injury. I'll just keep that as an open differential in this patient.
Madam, if it is a chronic Budd-Chiari with a lot of intrahepatic collaterals and just IVC obstruction now, can they present like this?
Then they will have chronic venous congestion of the lower limb. Veins will come up, prominent veins will come up in the abdomen. In its absence, it means the stent is patent. Wherever is the stent, whether it's in the IVC or hepatic vein. 99%, supposing we do not know whether stent, supposing the patient had a stent in the IVC, unlikely because ascites is present. So apparently the stent has to be either a TIPS or it is stent in the hepatic vein.
If it initially it was just hepatic veins and now the IVC, then if it is an acute IVC thrombosis, the collaterals will take time to develop, isn't it?
It will take time to develop, and ascites should have come in. That's why that OCP pills of that 2 weeks duration tells you it's more of a drug-induced liver injury rather than, I really do not know the investigation. I didn't read all the slides, but overall, this is what I feel. I will keep a wide differential, OCP related, and she has got an underlying liver disease of a chronic Budd-Chiari syndrome, hepatic vein occlusion most likely, which got treated with a stent deployment or a DIPS or a TIPS. A TIPS, DIPS, or a hepatic vein, a web listing with a stent deployment. This will be my differential at this stage.
So yeah, I also feel this because if it is purely IVC obstruction, it is difficult to explain the hepatomegaly and jaundice part, and there is no ascites.
Yeah.
Okay, so there should be two problems. That's what I feel.
That's what she has dual problem, definitely. Yes. Maybe she's got an IVC obstruction. That's the only way you can explain the lower limb. But the large tender liver that she has got could be a veno-occlusive, hepatic venular pathology causing a large tender liver. That's the way I would approach. Okay. So how will you investigate this patient?
So as we, from history, this is a hepatic outflow tract obstruction. So it is like an...
Your first level 1 investigation of this patient, level 1. 2, I'll allow you to have 2 investigations. What will be your 2 important investigations? One will
I
be
will do the USG with Doppler study.
ultrasound and liver biochemistry. No, once you get
Yeah.
this, then you can start working. Already patient is on anticoagulants, so we already have that information. No, not defaulted.
Yeah.
She's continuing on anticoagulants. No, that you said.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
So
Yes,
I
ma'am.
for that workup later, but I first want to know what I'm thinking is right or wrong. So I need liver biochemistry to know whether there's actually a parenchymal liver disease. And then I'll also do a Doppler ultrasound to know the portal venous system, hepatic outflow system, and the IVC system right up to the right heart. Okay.
Okay.
So what
Yes,
information do
ma'am.
we have on this?
Can we discuss with the past investigation first? This review
No.
of.
Okay, just keep telling them. Okay.
Okay.
Because
So
right now, what you want is what is it now? They're not interested in this. What is it now? Then we can go to that. So what is it now? What
now,
was the Doppler?
ma'am, this time we have the actually we have a diagnosis. That's why screening ultrasonography was done. We don't have the report for that. That's why CT we go ahead directly with the CT. And for the blood investigation, bilirubin was 2.4, direct bilirubin was 2.0, AST was 40 and 33. It was not elevated on the admission day, and the albumin was 3.4. INR was elevated because of this, anticoagulation, and APT was 64. Hemoglobin was low, 7.7. Platelet was 122,000. In that, TLC was 12,300, neutrophil 78%. ESR was 112 and CRP was 288.
This is a liver function test. Liver biochemistry, bilirubin is 2.4. AST. This is the time when she came with jaundice. Huh?
Yeah, she came admission. This is the picture. 2.8, ma'am. It's a 2.4. Sorry, my mistake, but 2.8.
Okay. So what is the interpretation of the liver function test? No? It's almost
So the
just mild conjugated hyperbilirubinemia. Alkaline phosphatase is normal. So there's not much of a hepatocellular jaundice, no?
yes, ma'am.
There's not much of hepatocellular, no? OT, SGOT, SGPT are all normal. Alkaline phosphatase is also normal. Albumin is also good. And INR is part of the anticoagulant treatment that she's taking. So therefore, what's your interpretation of the LFT? Platelet count is showing marginal. Overall, the liver seems normal. So the jaundice that you mentioned doesn't seem to be a issue. It is just a chronic hepatocellular. So what was the Doppler ultrasound at this stage?
So CT, actually we did CT because Doppler.
There is a high ESR, just 1 second, high ESR and very high CRP. Any explanation for that? ESR 112, CRP 288.
I missed on that. Yeah,
That may be underlying disease activity of some sort. If
there is some
infection
underlying
or
disease.
Yeah, because TLC is 12,300 with not neutrophils of 78%, and ESR is very high. So
inflammatory process is most likely. Yeah, CRP is also elevated, but you have to keep a watch on that ESR. Okay.
Okay, imaging.
Imaging.
Imaging, this is the CT scan imaging.
Just describe this is the recent one, no?
Yeah, this is a recent one. So
just describe it.
So this is a sagittal section of abdomen which showed the large liver of with a heterogeneous intensity in the liver with left lobule is almost atrophied. There is no presence of ascites and
what is this thing? Caudate lobe. Caudate lobe. Can you show
caudate lobe? Yeah, caudate lobe is a hypertrophied, and this region.
Caudate lobe. Yeah.
This is hypertrophied, and mild splenomegaly we can see. Second thing in IVC, we can see the thrombus here.
Yeah. Yeah. It is not suprahepatic. It is
infrahepatic.
Can you trace the IVC to the RA? You have any pictures on
Yeah,
the
in
IVC?
yeah, next image, 1 minute. So this is a coronal view of the IVC. We can trace the thrombus from the intrahepatic region up to the hepatic stent, which was deployed in a previous admission. So almost at the entry of hepatic vein stent, there is a thrombosis.
No, because it's all infrarenal.
Yeah.
No,
Yes.
it's more. So it is either retrohepatic. It is not actually involving the suprahepatic segment of the IVC. The stent is in the hepatic vein. No?
Yes, hepatic vein.
Show the other picture where you had the hepatic vein, the stent, because it's not clear here. There was one picture which you had the right hepatic vein stented. This one, yeah.
This one.
So at this time, when they did the right hepatic vein, what was the IVC like? Any information we have?
IVC was normal, sir. The previous imaging I can show you, ma'am.
That was normal?
Yeah, IVC was not ocular. So this is the previous imaging. Cross-sectional imaging showed all the 3 hepatic veins are thrombosed with ascites with perihepatic fluid collection, and there is a heterogeneous intensity in the liver.
Yeah.
With this IV, almost the hepatic vein entry in the IVC is almost blocked, but IVC is patent.
But you cannot see actually IVC. 1 minute, yeah, IVC is patent. Yeah, IVC is patent, sure. So whatever she's had is a stasis thrombus. That's what I said. No, they have what's called as a stasis thrombus, which extends from the. So what happens in these patients is they'll have huge collaterals elsewhere, and the thrombus is just a stasis thrombus in the IVC. That's what has happened in this patient. Therefore, the swelling of the lower limb is more prominent than in the junction of the hepatic vein and the IVC. That's why ascites is not coming up. Normally, if you have a good contrast, you can see all the collaterals. So nothing is seen here. I'm not able to pick up any collaterals. So now what should be your workup?
Deepak, this is the old one or the new one?
This is the old one.
Okay, can you show the new one also? Okay, new one.
The new one is the one he showed, I think, with extensive thrombus.
Yeah, this is the stent on right hepatic vein. This is the IVC thrombus starting from here with caudate lobe hypertrophy, and portal vein is patent. This is the extension of the thrombus from.
So now what should be the workup? Now tell what should be the workup.
So
the workup now. So now she's got hepatic vein that is patent. You have to explain the jaundice. Most probably jaundice is just a hepatocellular jaundice, nothing to do with the oral contraceptive pills. It's just a chronic liver disease, no? With a chronic liver disease. And what she has is occlusion of the IVC causing presentation of more of the jaundice. That the way you described it looked as though it was very intense. So if on examination you find that the jaundice is not very deep, then you can mask the history of jaundice and say that on examination I found this. You understand?
Okay.
Because if you bring that as a chief complaint, jaundice for 2 to 3 days, it looked to me that I should be having a bilirubin of 10 or something. But if it is just very mild, then you can just bring in that during the course of examination, I found this, which means it's part of an ongoing chronic liver disease. It's got nothing to do with the oral contraceptive pills.
If I remove the jaundice from a history, can the discussion will be diverted to non-liver diseases? Abdominal pain, nausea,
right upper quadrant pain. No, it's not a question of diversion. You have edema of the leg and you have a large liver with a background history. Now it's easy for you to explain. The jaundice is just part of the chronic liver disease. It's just a chronic liver disease state where you have near normal albumin, which you expect in these patients, and you have the oral contraceptive pills, which is just an add-on. Just it was a red herring, nothing to do with this. But what do you think would have happened in this patient? Now, what workup would you do? Now do we have the prothrombotic workup?
Yeah.
Is it possible for any of the prothrombotic workup?
Yeah, previously the workup was done. Actually, her previous report in January 20 says to a platelet of 5,000, which was not usual for the chronic liver disease. It was low. So LDH is elevated. Hemoglobin is 6.8 with a ferritin level of 498. So direct Coombs test was positive, and CRP and ESR was mildly elevated. So that's why underlying autoimmune disease or inflammatory disease we have suspected. At a time, albumin was 2.8 and A/G ratio was 1.1. GGT was 105. The ascitic fluid study was done. It suggested of high protein ascites at a time with 250 cells and neutrophil of is 70%.
APLA is positive, huh?
Yeah,
She beat
yeah.
her to
So
glycoprotein. Okay.
yeah. So she, her previous radiology we have already discussed. Again, her bone marrow examination also was done to rule out any underlying.
Was a JAK2? Did they have a JAK2 mutation study done on her? No.
No, ma'am, because I already APLA was with this
Yeah, but you
investigative
always
positive for
start
epilepsy.
off. Yeah, you always start off with the JAK2 mutation, then proceed for the other tests. Generally, that's the usual. That's the usual thing that we do. No, so always ask for a JAK2 mutation because of the prothrombotic state. Underlying prothrombotic state you have to consider. So one is APLA is positive. So what should be so now you have an underlying prothrombotic state. Now what do you think has caused? So recurrence rates are high in such patients. No, they can have a recurrence of thrombosis. So
Yes,
how do you think we should manage her now, since it is positive? So what will be the management?
She will need lifelong anticoagulant therapy with oral anticoagulant, vitamin K antagonist we can give. And before that, I would like to go with upper.
Yeah, but despite that, the thrombus is progressing. No, there is a thrombus that is there in the IVC. No.
Yeah.
Thrombosis is in the IVC. So what should be the plan?
Yeah.
How would you manage?
Is now on anticoagulant therapy, she developed thrombus again. That's why I will go with a hepatic venoplasty or TIPS procedure. I will see the patency of hepatic veins. Previous
Doppler ultrasound would be the most important investigation. If hepatic vein is patent, you just leave her alone. Okay, as far as hepatic venous outflow system is concerned. The problem is the IVC obstruction, which is causing an occlusion. So whether you should have a filter, IVC filter or something, so that thrombus does not extend into the right side, right heart. That's important in this patient because IVC is otherwise patent. But she's got an underlying thrombus in the IVC. So I think that is most important. So how would you manage the IVC thrombus is what is important in this patient. While you continue with anticoagulants, the thrombus is still continuing, no? The thrombus, that's a new thrombus. Yeah.
So
and she has to stop the oral. Yeah, OCP she has to stop, okay? Because that may be the one that has triggered the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so actually, I will go for angioplasty. At the time, if IVC venogram, I will prefer when there is a difference of any pressure between right atrium and IVC. And if
IVC gram will not help in this patient because there's a huge thrombus in the retrohepatic segment of the IVC. So where are you going to get the pressure gradient? It's already a chronic thrombus that is there in the IVC. Okay, so you cannot, there's no question of doing stenting or this thing bypassing. You'll not be able to remove the thrombus. Only what you can probably try is a thrombolysis. Thrombolysis of the thrombus that is present. What usually happens in these patients is when there's a long-standing thrombus like this, collaterals will open up. Okay, most important for us is that this thrombus should not migrate and cause an embolism. So I think I would consider really an IVC filter so that we don't have an extension of the thrombus. VT, any suggestion?
Yeah, this is the main problem. Looks like IVC thrombus now. Yeah, so I think the management has to be directed in that lanes.
Yeah.
And the hepatic vein stent seems to be patent.
Patent, exactly. So it is more of a thrombus that should not extend in further upward, causing more problem to the right heart. Because a thrombus can sometimes move in, So I mean, this we have to discuss with the radiologist and consider whether thrombolysis can be done or stent. You cannot place a stent in this situation, and you will not look for a pressure gradient. But most important is not allow the thrombus to extend into the right side of the heart. That is most important. I think that's the way forward, and continue the patient on lifelong anticoagulant.
Okay, in the acute phase, injection heparin, they have given heparin, I think, and probably we are seeing what in the initial phase of the admission, we have to know what happened. And this heparin is to make sure that this doesn't happen in other parts of the venous system, number one, and prevent the extension. And if possible, the intervention radiology help thrombolysis of the thrombus in the IVC. And as ma'am said, IVC filter. And
they also have provision for a thrombectomy. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, should we know the further course of the patient in the hospital?
Yeah, she underwent a IVC angioplasty. Sorry, angioplasty, and after that there was no IVC stent was placed. Her financial condition was not that much this, and because of presence of early hepatic stent, IVC stent we cannot place at this time also. So,
What did they do with the thrombus? That's what I'm interested in. What did they do with the thrombus?
But just anticoagulation and venoplasty was done.
Venoplasty was done.
Angioplasty will not help at all in this patient, no, because the IVC to the RA is patent. So there's no question of angioplasty in this patient. If at all, the thrombus that is there in the IVC, that is the one that has to be tackled. Sometimes when it becomes chronic, there's no problem, collaterals will open up. More important is if it is a fresh thrombus, then the chances of it moving to the right heart is important. The pulmonary embolism is what we are worried about in this patient. That's my worry. That's the only thing that I will consider. And when you're doing angioplasty, you have to be extra careful. Some of these thrombus would suddenly, as you finish the angioplasty, there'll be a sudden gush of this thrombus into the right heart. We've had patients with pulmonary embolism going in for this. So you have to do thrombolysis, you have to do a thrombectomy, and then do an angioplasty if at all. That too, if there's a pressure gradient. Since there's not much of a pressure gradient, there's no role for angioplasty. The edema leg will also subside over a period. This edema leg, that's exactly what I said. The edema leg appears to be non-hepatic segment. That gave a clue that it was a non-hepatic segment. Okay.
Dr. Deepak, on physical examination, how bad was the jaundice, icterus?
Very mild.
Icterus was mild icterus.
Okay.
That's why.
That was actually the red herring in the end story.
Yeah.
If that history was not there, it would have been a straightforward diagnosis.
Exactly. That's exactly what I said. That's why I said sometimes when you're seeing the patient with a light yellow, then you just keep probing in and find out whether it's just part of a chronic liver disease with mild jaundice. Is there a role for liver transplant in this patient?
If there is a acute fulminant failure, you can consider a transplant. If the TIPS procedure is not possible or there's a failure of procedure, then.
So we still have a backup of TIPS. So right now she's safe, nothing to be done. Okay. And a few other things, just read Rotterdam scoring, Clichy scoring. Why do you think all these scoring systems came in with Rotterdam and Clichy and all? And why not MELD? The reason is that these patients have more of a passive congestion. No, it's more of a passive congestion. So invariably, as you saw in this, the albumin is normal right to the end. The INR is abnormal because of the anticoagulation. Whereas when you take a MELD, you'd have all the parameters which are abnormal, which are dynamic. Whereas in Budd-Chiari syndrome, it's more of a passive phenomenon. So none of the parameters of MELD or CTP will really have a place. So you're looking more for other factors. So you have to read about Rotterdam and Clichy scoring, which has other parameters other than add-on parameters that is not there in MELD and in CTP scoring. Understand? And the BCS TIP scoring. So these are the three scoring systems you should know. At least you must know the parameters. And why do you have this system? Why not you don't use MELD. You don't use MELD for scoring because MELD will be low. Because most of the tests will be normal. Your albumin will be normal, the INR will be normal, everything will be normal. So MELD scoring will not fit in. That is the reason why they came up with the other scoring system for prognostication of patients with Budd-Chiari syndrome. Okay, those few things you have to read. And of course, all the rest is all theory. Okay, the rest is all theory. But I think approach to this patient, the learning points are that the onset of acute abdominal pain on the right side, indicating obstruction, still it does not fit in because ascites has not set in. So that sudden onset of distension that you described, the way you described the pain, suggested that it could be an oral contraceptive pill related veno-occlusive like picture. And because the stent was deployed and it was patent, maybe the ascites did not come in. So ascites was not a manifestation in this patient. So that is one important message. But when you're presenting the case, keep the two things as two independent pathology, whether it's OCP that is causing the sudden pain, veno-occlusive like picture, but the stent being patent, allowing this thing to decompress and allowing the fluid to pass, and therefore the outflow tract is minimal. And therefore the liver cell derangement is likely due to hepatic vein occlusion. That's one possibility, sinusoidal obstruction syndrome or a veno-occlusive disease, hepatic venular occlusion in oral contraceptive pills rather than major hepatic vein. That's one important message we had. And you have when you're presenting, even if you know in the exam that it is a case of hepatic vein stent, have a wide differential. She may be having tips, it may be hepatic vein, it may be dips. So that can explain that she responded to the stent that was deployed to this patient. Okay, it's very important that have all the three, because I did not see the whole thing. So to me, the differentials were all these were the stents that could be deployed. And then patient is asymptomatic throughout. And now it's come with recurrence of symptoms after the OCP. 6% of patients with OCP pills can develop Budd-Chiari syndrome. But it is 2 to 6%, you know, so they don't discuss so much about OCP compared to the pregnancy. Pregnancy, yes. But OCP it is something on the wall, you know, whether you may consider or you may not consider the possibility of an OCP pill presenting as outflow tract obstruction. On the other hand, OCP can present like a drug-induced liver injury. So your questions in the exam will be diverted to drug-induced liver injury due to OCP pills. Underlying liver disease is there. At the same time, it's not behaving like acute liver failure. It's not behaving like ACLF, although there's a chronic liver disease. Nothing is happening in this patient. Okay, so what has happened is, to me, it seems quite clear, it's the OCP that has precipitated the entire problem, but not manifesting as outflow tract obstruction because the tips or the dips is working or the hepatic vein stent is working. So ascites is not manifested. So that's the way you can conclude. And then the edema leg that she's had, again, indicates it is an OCP that has caused an overlying risk in a patient who's thrombophilic, indicating that a fresh thrombus has occurred somewhere in the IVC system.
Ma'am, you are muted. Chandy ma'am, okay. What you said right now was not audible. Can you repeat?
So what I was saying is, if you just take the whole thing into perspective, patient has an underlying thrombophilic phenomenon, and the underlying thrombophilic phenomenon, she's taken oral contraceptive pills, and it has caused IVC obstruction, but definitely it has not affected the suprahepatic segment because the presentation is only lower edema. That's why I said it is IVC obstruction, but the level could be infrarenal or it could be retrohepatic, but it is definitely not the suprahepatic because ascites has not come in. Number one. Number two, the oral contraceptive pill has caused some underlying liver disease. It has caused some sort of a acute onset of a presentation where the patient has got sudden increase in the abdominal liver enlargement or a pain due to the stretch on the liver capsule due to OCP pills, but not manifesting as outflow tract obstruction because the hepatic vein has a stent which is deployed and it is patent. So your final diagnosis will be underlying thrombophilic state. We do not know what it is. Based on this, we have APLA, in which oral contraceptive pill has worsened the so-called APLA, causing IVC obstruction. And the OCP pills has also caused a hepatocellular type of involvement of the underlying liver disease due to outflow tract obstruction, but not overtly manifesting because the hepatic vein is patent. So the outflow tract is not manifesting with ascites. I think that would be the gross nutshell of the whole presentation. Okay.
Yes, sir. Deepak, is there anything specific to be administered for her APLA syndrome?
Earlier at the flare, she's treated with a rituximab and steroid 3 years back. After the platelet count recovered back, that medication was stopped. Now there was no active medication for any APLA syndrome.
Okay, but she's on anticoagulants, no? She's on oral.
Anticoagulation as well. Yeah, oral warfarin.
Okay, warfarin. But nowadays they've also said direct anticoagulant, direct oral anticoagulant is also as effective as the warfarin. And studies have not shown anything adverse against these drugs. So either of them can be used. And can she get married? That's the question. So most important is all this has to be explained to the so-called person, and because she will have major issues during pregnancy and delivery. And as of now, there's no indication for a liver transplant. She still has one more hope of a DIPS if she does develop a thrombus. Okay, and liver transplant I don't think will be considered at this particular stage. She's not yet had a liver cell failure. Albumin is good, 3.4 or even more than that, 3.5 or 3.6 you mentioned. So as of now, I don't think I would consider liver transplant in this patient because she's got an underlying thrombophilic state. So even post-transplant, she has to be on a long-term anticoagulant.
Anticoagulation.
BT, we can conclude the session.
That is, I also feel the same. So,
Yeah.
background APLA syndrome, which initially
Yeah.
produced hepatic vein outflow obstruction, which was
Yeah.
stented, and she was on anticoagulant, she was fine. The recent problem was probably the OCP induced. Even the problem is that the liver is palpable 6 centimeter. Whether it does not regress completely after the initial problem, I do not know. But the jaundice part is very minimal. So there is very little.
The thing is, all the 3 hepatic veins were blocked, so they opened up only one. So the rest of it, so it's not totally effective. Yeah.
Yeah. That may be the reason.
That may be the reason. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the only way you can explain.
I think if some questions about Aplar syndrome, its other manifestation in other systems, skin, neurology, etc., may come up during the discussion. And management of Aplar and pregnancy will be an important thing, because that's a very important thing. And all those things may come up.
Yeah.
So I think these are the things which they have to do homework.
Read all the thrombophilic states. Yeah.
Workup of thrombophilia in a patient with hepatic outflow or IVC obstruction. Then another thing about the various procedures done for diagnosis, and as well as the interventional procedures done for management. Then directly acting anticoagulants is the one which are now used, and so those of you who are not using it, we have to at least know the theoretical aspect of it.
Yeah, many patients are on it, sure. I think that's a key message that you conveyed it nicely. Yeah. So can
any other faculty who are logged in? You want to make any comments? Dr. Ismail, any comments from your side?
No, sir. It was a good discussion.
So, ma'am, can you summarize by telling us the learning points for today?
Learning points is, I think history taking is very important. And as this particular patient is an ongoing disease, it's a continuum. Patient is already on anticoagulant, she's continuing the treatment. So I really start by saying that patient, symptomatic patient from 2018, history of abdominal distension requiring stent deployment in February 2018. Current problem, presenting with acute abdominal pain associated with jaundice and swelling of the lower limbs. And then start off the history by saying that in the year 2018, but make it very brief. Within 5 lines, you should finish off that and then expand on this history. And when you come down to discussion, you have to bring in the OC peoples as one of the factors. You have to discuss. You cannot dismiss that fact, because that December issue, that's the one that has precipitated the whole problem. And it must be that because although it's behaving like an outflow tract, because one hepatic vein is patent, she's not manifesting completely. So there's some hepatocellular type of presentation presenting with mild jaundice. And most important is the edema of the lower limb, which suggests that underlying thrombophilic state with the OCP has caused the second trigger and manifested as IVC obstruction, not at the suprahepatic level, but at the retrohepatic or suprarenal level, because there's no anasarca. So that is most important. Always keep an open mind. Once you do stenting, then there should be considered dips, you consider tips, and you also consider the possibility of just a hepatic vein stenting. All the 3 you have to discuss. And the patency could be maintained with the anticoagulants. So I think that's the main message. And Dr. VT has nicely summarized what are the things you should learn. So read about the workup of a thrombophilic state. And important message, in a patient portal hypertension, you find that the spleen is massive. Platelet count is more than 2 lakhs. Always consider the possibility of an MPN. This is most important thing. If in a patient with chronic liver disease, you find that a liver is disproportionately enlarged, always start working up for an MPN, and always start with a JAK2 mutation. And platelet count, you expect it to be on the lower side, but you find it's more than 2 lakhs, again start considering MPN. So that is one thing. Here the platelet count was actually on the lower side. I don't know, maybe it was part of the thrombo, I do not know. I cannot explain why the platelet count was 5,000. I do not know.
Is it part of APLA syndrome?
APLA, yeah.
Okay, there's some question. Ma'am, should we mention BMI in a patient with the presence of edema?
That's usual question. No, you calculate the dry weight. That's it.
Yeah, so you have to. So that is important. You have to calculate the modified version. Okay.
Yeah, dry by BMI.
Okay. And I think they have also to read the relevant topic in their textbooks, as well as to find out important publications of this. Fortunately, residents, you are lucky to have ma'am who has got a lot of original publication in the field of hepatic outflow IVC obstruction. Here,
Yeah, only thing, the references don't appear now because they were done in 70s. Now the references are all 2015 and 20. So this is not old. So the references do not appear. Anyway, that's not a problem.
So thank you, ma'am. Thank you for that wonderful discussion. I think
Thank you.
it was a very nice discussion which we all enjoyed, and we
Just
expect.
one mention: the collaterals collaterals will not appear if a patient has got just a fresh thrombus, it will take time. So that the absence of collaterals once again tells you that the thrombus is fresh. It's a new onset.
Okay, so in a patient with the acute onset of symptoms, if the collaterals are absent, that means the collateral has not really developed. In a patient with a chronic illness, if you are not finding dilated veins on the abdomen or on the back, it could also mean that there are internal collaterals which is taking care of the flow. So for both, we have explanation.
Yeah, only thing is in this patient, even in the CT, we're not picking up the collaterals. The CT is not picking up collaterals, again suggesting that this thrombus is fresh. It's not a chronic thrombus. So earlier also it was acute, so she was managed. So collaterals did not develop. This is again a new thrombus, again collaterals have not developed. That's the reason, though there's IVC obstruction, at least the inferior epigastric, circumflex iliac and all should have opened. Nothing is open.
Ma'am, there was a session. Okay, the session, you have sent me a post about another teaching session with Tamil Nadu chapter, and
yeah, there's a pediatric session on Saturday. It starts at 5 p.m. There are 3 short cases, followed by a nice pediatric session, which is actually the children who are moving into the adolescent age. So those diseases are being covered. I've sent the link to Dr. Varghese, and he will pass it on to the PGs.
Okay, so I request all of you to attend that session. And for next month, in the first 3 sessions, we'll have actually recent advances. The first one will be by Dr. Matthew Philip on 2nd on recent advances in endoscopy. 9th will be recent advances hepatology by Dr. Venkatakrishnan. 16th, rest of gastroenterology by Dr. Sojan. And on 23rd, we have Professor Narendranath again coming with a statistical series. He will actually take a journal club with a critique on the research methodology. Rather than learning the subject as a dry subject, he is going to really do a practical critique on a journal and how the methodology was the right methodology, etc. And on 30th, we have Professor Seyed Babu giving clinics. We are planning 2 cases on 30th, and in the month of April, it will be full of clinics, because that's the time when final years are free, and we expect ma'am and other faculty also to chip in. And also please let us when you have your clinic so that our residents also can attend it. So I think
they're already in it. Yeah, Thursday is a clinic, 9 p.m. Thursday.
Okay, so Thursday 9 p.m. Okay.
9 p.m.
So
Dr.
Sujit, please take note of it and give the link to all our pages so that I can also attend. So in the month of April, till their practical examination, we'll have almost weekly clinics, 2 cases per week if possible we will do. We expect your cooperation for that also, ma'am.
Sure. We'll come back.